Hi, Will. Welcome to the Leaders Report on the 17th of March. How are you?
I'm very well, Mark. How are you doing?
Look, I'm doing very well in Shanghai and enjoying my mind being blown.
You've been spending quite a lot of time in China now. I know that your plans were changed, but you've spent, I think, a couple of weeks now.
Yeah, technically, I should be in Abu Dhabi today, traveling to Dubai tomorrow. Instead, at Shanghai today, traveling to Beijing tomorrow. The last couple of weeks have thrown everyone's plans into turmoil, and mine have been no different. So rather than going between Asia and London via the Middle East, I'm going directly from Beijing to London.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of reflections there. I guess the first one is the state of play in China. And I know we want to spend a bit of time on that. And the second is, kind of how the world has reacted to the shockwaves. And obviously, we've experienced some of that with Better Future and our plans for awards presentations. I mean, maybe some reflections on that to start with.
Well, firstly, to the community who have adapted and changed, coming to the Better Future Awards in London. We're devastated that so many people are not going to be able to come. And we've got a very interesting where you've gone from a larger audience, we're going into these super VIP event things that we'll be doing. So that's been interesting. But the other thing is that everybody is having to work out how to adapt and change, and collectively, that's a lot of change, a lot of disruption that's taking place. And all of that is because 20% of the world's oil and gas is being disrupted going through the straits. And there's a very telling point there that sometimes it doesn't take 100% of the economy to be affected to disrupt your world. It can take 20%, and everything becomes reorganized. Everything is
Yeah.
down.
And it's interesting how adaptation is a core strength now, because obviously we've had to respond to this situation, and there are all sorts of different alliances and pacts that are now being considered. But maybe that's the point to just talk about where China is and how you're kind of reflecting on some of the planning stability that exists there in the context of what we know in the
Mm.
West has been a hugely disruptive time.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Over the last week, we've seen the 5-year plan being dropped. And what's fascinating is it's a 5-year plan, it's a multi-departmental, multi-threaded strategy in there. It looks after the environment, it looks after education, it looks after their military interests, it looks after their economic interests, it looks after a country, you could say, which is vastly different than the 24-hour news cycle that we're getting in the West, where there is one opinion out of a Western government, and that's whatever they want to tell us from the podium on that day. A parallel processing we know works so much better, and it's amazing to see China is working in that realm and that they're pushing forward. But they're pushing forwards in creating more order, not more chaos. And I think in the last 12 months, we've seen the West has been engaged in key players creating chaotic circumstances that mean that we're having to stop, sort the chaos out, and therefore we're slipping behind because no longer is the West the only game in town. You now have that China is moving at its own pace, and then the West is moving at its pace. And every time the West stops, China gets a bit further ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting contrast, the kind of definition of where the kind of political focus is. And we've talked about that in some of the context around the development of AI. And I think that's a really good point of fact.
Yeah, and I want to show you two devices that I bought while I've been here. One is I have this translator, which will translate a whole bunch of languages, but does Chinese incredibly well. It works offline, and there's no subscription to it. So I actually own the AI in this device. And the other one that I've got is these amazing set of headphones, which are enabling me to go do bilingual interviews with people, which again does real time translation for me. And I went to a conference yesterday and just put the headphone on and was listening. They weren't expecting to have a Western person there or a non Chinese speaker for most of the day, and I was able to participate fully. Again, I own the AI there. It isn't something that I'm renting from one of the Mag 5.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting point of difference, isn't there? Because there is a kind of general adaptation of AI that could affect all sorts of different components. There doesn't seem to be much control, and then the point of difference from a Chinese model is the adaptation and the ability to plug the technology, which clearly works, given your illustrations, into benefit enhancing and ownership. It's quite a different model.
Yeah, and I think I could say that the Chinese model is AI, applied AI for everyone. They want to see how does every human get an advantage by having more AI in their life. It's stated in the 5-year plan that they want to become more technologically savvy, but it's applied technologies. One of the things I've been very disturbed about, with the Western take on AI is that there's going to be a very small number of companies who have artificial general intelligence, and that's the race. And we seem to
Right.
be losing the fact that these tools should be applied to every life, in every circumstance, in every industry to help humans, not replace humans.
Yeah. So there's a huge difference there in terms of the capacity development that AI has been focused and the capital or the revenue opportunities that's been demonstrated through, the tech companies we know well in the West.
Mm. So I look at the Chinese AI deployment as being an aid to their society, whereas I look at what's happening from the US tech companies is, in a way, it's global corporations committing treason against the populations of countries. They're threatening our jobs, they're threatening our livelihoods, they're not offering anything that offers any form of stability, and the governments of every nation are accepting that their population might have no economic future, or at least economic stress and uncertainty. And that's not good governance. And it's a stark difference. One group of people are buoyant, and whether it's the taxi driver or whether it's a technology company, they're working on applying AI to make their world go better. In the West, everyone seems to have angst over how is AI going to affect my world, and will I have any money, and will I have a job in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a contrast, isn't it? And particularly given that in the West, governments are struggling to keep up with regulation, even on technologies such as social media, which are well
Yeah.
established, and therefore there is a disconnect between the interests of a country and its population, and of course the conglomerated interests of a small number of important companies that are running the tech as well. So we're beginning to see, kind of a point of difference in terms of how the deployment will
Mm.
work, what the advantages are, what the long-term economic consequences are, and maybe it's that long-termism that you've been experiencing over the last few weeks. How do you sort of see? You've mentioned the 5-year plan, but how do you see, the Chinese design community responding, and what are the kind of observations you've had? Because I know you've been talking to quite a few studios.
Well, say when I got here 2 weeks ago, I was given a private briefing by a technology company here in Shanghai about a new product to go help designers with getting their concepts and getting their design process streamlined and accelerated. Phenomenal. That should come out in about September, and we'll be able to speak more about that then. Then, when I got to Shenzhen, I got to see more products, but these weren't technology companies. These were architectural practices. They were interior design practices, all applying AI to make their work flow much faster. And that's the interesting thing. It's about the speed of the workflow. It's about the speed of concepts. It's about the speed of execution. It's not replacing people. And if anything, they've got a much better understanding about the coaching and creativity, combination that goes in. Where's the concept coming from, and how do we get that into something which is a viable, candidate to move forward? That's the demonstration that I've been seeing, and the pace that they're evolving, and the relationships that exist between tech companies and traditional design professionals. It's astounding. I was at a conference yesterday in Shanghai with the team from Matrix, And they really blew my mind. It was like, okay, level one that you were talking about, these integrated design disciplines that cover all of the lead and weld processes, the sustainable material sourcing, using digital libraries, creating digital twins. And then the final session that they went and did in the day talked about, just they brought in these people who were AI tech model makers, and one of the guys was the guy behind the banana model. And he's sitting in the room in front of me and he's talking. He's a nice, relaxed guy, but so wise about how the technology will be applied to benefit humans, not how the technology will be used to replace humans. And it came through it like they're just layers. This is about the country being more efficient and more organized, not about more chaos.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting time for obviously Chinese design companies and Chinese creativity, given that huge amounts of kind of the big infrastructure projects are now underway. I know you traveled between Beijing and Shanghai at 350 kilometers without really thinking about it. We're now in the next phase. We're now in the development phase, which is quite different. I mean, maybe some words on that, Mark.
Yeah, so the big build, or to use the China term, we've got the Great Wall of China. You've had the great infrastructure build. I think we're now in the Great Renovation, and the Great Renovation is that the commercial property is about 35% unoccupied. And that's a very large number. But they're not that concerned. If you go think back 6 years ago when the pandemic began, we were all talking about who's ever going to return back to the office. Everyone wants to work from home. In the West, we were concerned about occupancy rates, and not having taken up more than 70% of the markets. So we've got an issue there where we've seen that 30% has now gone down to between 0 and 5%, depends which city. The same thing's going to happen in China, that it will take a very short period of time for those offices to fill up. But they need to be renovated, they need to be remodeled, they need to be reimagined, and that's what this great renovation is about. And we're also seeing people who have now lived in their apartment for a period of time
Yep.
through the great build, and then they turn around and they're saying, well, now we want to do the next renovation. So that construction industry is actually on the wane on those mega projects, which if you go think in London, there's been the Cross City Tunnel was a mega project. If you go think in Melbourne and Sydney with the metro products, programs, they were mega builds as well. They come to an end. And then you get back to, well, how does society operate? And that's where China's up to. It's working out how does it build out? How does it build the layers of that textural side that is their future? And it's been interesting meeting the studios. I've recorded several podcasts with them that will drop soon, and they're talking about this much smaller scale, but it's actually the granularity of that scale is a lot finer. So the design industry is now really getting to go put in a textural layer that we may not have seen in the big build, and what we're now seeing is that that's coming through in this renovation stage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting shift from the kind of build from new, and also the way in which renovation and material understanding, building performance. You know, I think I reflect on the fact that a lot of this data, a lot of this information, is not always consumed easily, but it seems to
Mm.
be much more a sort of shared resource, and therefore progress is not just in terms of um, the actual built environment, but it's also in terms of performance, efficiency, and that side of things as well. So there's actually a deeper kind of commitment to design process, design thinking, and then the outcomes as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, but what is interesting is the last update that we went and did was a couple of weeks ago, and I was sort of talking about how buoyant the Australian design studios were that we were visiting, and that was just on the cusp as the Iran situation was evolving. I'd imagine some of that wind has been taken out of people's sails because there's now chaos that they're having to go deal with. Working out how to bring order to go have longitudinal programs that talk about prosperity, that you can actually imagine that your future is an ascending path. That's what I'm witnessing here with everybody that I'm talking to. Nobody is talking about, even though we think that the Chinese market is soft, Nobody's talking about a soft, struggling, declining market. Everything is on the rise, except one part of China that I went to, which was Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, they have both private capital and they've got then the public wealth and public services. And there's a fight going on between the private model system and the centralized system, and Hong Kong is actually struggling to get on top of that. It would appear that private capital has potentially become greedy, it's become self focused, and some of the community contributions that it might need to make and affordances, that it doesn't have the same flexibility. So things that are not a problem, social issues that are not a problem in mainland China, are quite significant social problems in Hong Kong. And I spent time at the PolyU at the Jockey Club's Social Innovation Centre, and what's interesting there is they have a need for a social innovation institute, whereas that's just part of the delivery system in China. So it's interesting where you look, oh well, what's the difference between the systems? One is that the Western model is more, we'll fix up something after it's broken. The Chinese system is trying to say, how do we create the order so that we don't get stuck behind something being broken? And I know when I drive down the road in the West, I like to not have potholes, yet we have social infrastructure potholes that are all over the place. Whereas the roads in China are both good and that they haven't got some of those social infrastructure potholes as well. So it's been very interesting to look at both considerations.
Yeah, and there is such a contrast with how Hong Kong has become an adjunct to the progress that's been made in mainland China. Everything from the kind of technology to those social innovation, trying to solve issues that don't exist elsewhere as well. Um, Mark, what are your plans? Where are you going next? And how are you moving around?
Well, just before we get into that, I do just want to reflect back on something because I don't want to say that Hong Kong is dead, dying, and is not performing. But what is happening is there's a leaderboard of we're seeing China moving at one particular pace. We're seeing Europe moving at a pace. We're
Yeah,
seeing Australia moving at a pace. We've got Hong Kong moving at a pace. But in a competitive world, when you're not matching the increase in speed and momentum of an organization or a group that's in the lead pack, you're falling behind. And that relative position is what's important. In no way do I want to say that any other country is struggling, because all we're doing is talking comparatively. And the comparison is the important signal, because that might give us that we need to not be just thinking about our local politics and our local situation, but our global competitiveness. Because after all, the world is so much better when we trade with each other. But if you're behind other people, maybe you're not getting the same dollar value that you used to get of being an equivalent on being as progressed.
yeah, no, it's very true. I think that comparison is absolutely right. And there are obviously other places on your schedule that we'll be able to do leaders reports from as well.
Well, we will. The next one that we'll do, I'll actually be in London with you, and we'll do that in a week's time, because we're having to go and reconfigure the awards event and the festival that we were holding. The participation is very different, but what we're going to do is create the content that we would have been creating even if we don't have as many people in the audience. And those people who are attending, we're giving them this super VIP treatment. So we'll be doing this face to face when I get to London. And then before you know it, I'm in Scandinavia and Helsinki, Stockholm, and Copenhagen, which will be very interesting to see how do the Scandinavians, with the Baltic Sea tensions that they've got, which many people who aren't in Europe won't understand that, but how or what's the attitude of those countries who are looking at how is Russia creating chaos for them, or is it for the general population? Is it a non-event and they're getting on with life? So I look forward to being able
Yeah.
to give you an update on that.
Yeah, well, we're definitely looking forward to having you in London. And it's such a shame to miss out the Middle East leg. We have to allow that to stabilize again, which I certainly hope it will as soon as possible. And as you say, there's another sort of comparisons with how the Nordic region is responding, and how that's thriving as well. So, Mark, anything else just to drop into the end of this recording? It's been a really good conversation, so interesting in terms of your observations in China, and hopefully this is really useful for our viewers and our listeners.
Yeah, the key thing I'd be saying to everyone is there is a lot of positivity out there. There's a lot of momentum of markets which are growing, of briefs that are coming through. If you're finding that you're caught in a conversation with people who aren't riding that wave, find some people who are, or reach out to us and we'll put you in contact with some people because there is a very buoyant world of design out there. We want to make sure that our leaders are connected to it. We understand sometimes you're not surfing the best waves, and let's make sure that we can tell you where the breaks are so that you can get on top of them.
Yeah, great stuff, and absolutely, it'd be great to have contact with anyone that's interested in taking this conversation forward. Plans, ideas for development, links across the globe. That's something that we're very much focused on doing. Mark, thank you so much. I hope your next travels go well. We're very much looking forward to having you in London, and looking forward to doing another one of these recordings in a couple of weeks.
Great to have a conversation with you, Will.
Take care.